doesn't usually happen. We're going to have comments by the public. So anybody from the public that would like to speak to us about one of the issues, please come forward now.
Pledge of allegiance.
You want to do a pledge of allegiance? It's not on the, okay. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if you're on already.
Thank you.
Your name and address.
You got me by surprise.
Well, your name and address for the book, please.
My name's Terry Torres, and 1555 Club Drive is my address. I live in the city, work in the city, and pay taxes both for my business and my home in the city of Vero Beach. But I come here this morning, and first of all, good morning, members of the council, staff. Happy to be here. But I come here this morning as president of Main Street Vero Beach, and I come here to make an impassioned plea on behalf of the city of Vero Beach and on behalf of Main Street. Main Street programs are a national program. Main Streets are part of the National Main Street Center and they're subsidiaries of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. These programs are a proven program for downtown revitalization. And I think of our city when I came here in 1977 from Miami and what the downtown looked like then. And it was a dying downtown. Our old department stores were gone, the Watkey's department store, the RX Drugs, the theater was about to close. The downtown was slowly ebbing into decay. And now, nearly 4 decades later, we have a downtown that's again growing, that's revitalized. It's being nurtured by both the private sector, people like Bob Brackett, people like Mr. Haggerty, who owns the Pocahontas building, people like Mr. Willis, who owns multiple buildings downtown, including the Fish and Wildlife building. So the private sector has made significant investments in our Main Street area, and they've done it with the help of the public sector, our city of Vero Beach. I'm proud to be a Vero Beach, Vero Beachite, I guess we'd call ourselves, or for want of a better name. It's a lovely community. I wouldn't give it up for anything. My children are born, raised, and educated here, and so they only know Vero Beach. And I think what we do today is a legacy that we leave for them and that we leave for our grandchildren. So going back to Main Street programs are partnerships. They're partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. And we generally represent the private sector in the partnership, and we partner with our city of Vero Beach. And in the partnership, we manage to get things done that we couldn't manage to do on our own. So it's very important that we work together in a partnership. It's like a plant. We have to nurture it. We have to feed it. We have to water it. We have to constantly cultivate it. And if we don't, it's going to die. And we made a lot of progress in our downtown, and it would be a shame to see this progress come to an end. It's about all of the businesses that we've managed to bring to Main Street in the last 10 years. And just to mention a few, Avanzari, Gallery 14, Darby Gallery, Lighthouse Framing, The Grove and the Stamp. These are young people that founded these businesses. Villanova, Bijou, and the Lacrosse Shop, just to mention a few. Those are just a few of the businesses that are located in the downtown area. You don't have to look far to see what's happened with the financial district. So now we have a brand new Center State Bank. We have PNC Bank, we have Wells Fargo, we have Bank United, all in this downtown corridor along the US 1 route and the State Road 60 route. So we've not only become a business district, but we've become a financial district. And this represents a lot of dollars that are invested in our community. How many dollars have been reinvested locally? $11.4 million. Net gain in businesses, 57 businesses that we've gained. Net gain in jobs, 133 jobs. And number of building rehabilitations, 48. Count them, 48. That's a lot of buildings to be rehabbed, including the old courthouse building, the Seminole Plaza, Theater Plaza, and some of the others. What's the payback on this investment? The payback statewide is $18 for every dollar invested. And locally, it's $8 for every dollar invested. And we come to you today to ask that you continue funding Main Street, because without the funding, without the nurturing, without the partnership, it will surely die. And along with it, our downtown's going to die. So it's important that we maintain this partnership. It's important that we maintain a strong relationship between Main Street and the city of Vero Beach. And we ask that the funding be placed back on the budget for this year for Main Street, Vero Beach. Imagine the $25,000 that we received last year will return $200,000. That's an 8-to-1 ratio. That's a pretty good return on your investment. And I urge this council and I urge this staff to support funding for Main Street for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
If I may add to Terry's word, I'm Daniel Foreman. I'm treasurer of Main Street. Just a quick add on that, and the reason we're looking for the renewal of the $25,000. I just handed out a budget for the last 4 years, or the financial income statement, income and expenses for the last 4 years, and you'll see from there we have a very small budget, about $60,000 a year. We were getting $35,000 from the city 3 years ago and 4 years ago. It dropped to $25,000. As a result, we had a loss last year of $17,000 because we were not able to meet even this small budget. We do a lot of entertainment, which is costly. The Hibiscus Festival downtown Friday, there is a cost involved with the music and other things. So our revenue are rather limited, and without the city support, we are not going to be able to stay in business.
Thank you, Daniel.
And one more thing to add is that the tax dollars, the tourism tax, bed on heads on bed, with the county, we're not receiving any of that money, where other organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, the Cultural Council, Historical Society get those funds. We have not applied those funds because we've been relying on the city of Vero Beach.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, one other quick thing. Another thing that we're working on earnestly is the Business Improvement District, or sometimes referred to as Neighborhood Improvement Districts. And we've been working earnestly now for probably a year and a half or 2 years on forming the first business improvement district in the county, in Indian River County. There are about 22 of them now statewide, as I understand it. A business improvement district is a incremental tax financing program in which the increment of taxes over the base year would then be refunneled back into improvements for that particular district. And we hope to have that prepared by September to submit to the City Council for their approval. So that money would go right back into your historic downtown Vero Beach for improvements like pavers, pedestrian scale lighting, landscaping, perhaps expanding sidewalks to accommodate on-street dining, things of that nature, things that are visible, things that are a benefit to the entire community and the businesses that are located within the district.
Mr. Torres, may I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
What would be the ramifications to the organization and the events you just mentioned if, in fact, the council did remove your partial funding for your budget for next year?
It's potentially fatal for the organization, and we've lost our designation in the past due to funding. One of the requirements from the state and the national programs is that we maintain a full-time executive director. And
that's a requirement from the state?
That's a requirement from both the state and the national organizations. So if we lose the funding from the city, our budget is limited. We have about a $70,000 budget. So think of what we get, the bang for the buck, so to speak. For our $70,000, we're probably creating at least $600,000 in reinvestment in the community. So it's a great return on our dollar. But if we lose this funding from the city, we potentially cannot maintain the organization because we'll struggle to pay our executive director and the other expenses of the organization.
And which events taking place in the community would then be cut as well as a result of this?
If Main Street ceases as an organization, then we could say goodbye to the Hibiscus Festival. We could say goodbye to our Downtown Fridays. We could say goodbye to our, not potentially our art strolls, because the art district has now picked up the slack on that, and they're doing that more or less on their own. We started that as a Main Street program, but they're doing a wonderful job on their own with the art strolls. It's a theme that we introduced to Main Street, the Art, Dine, and Design District, and it's been a very successful theme for us. But a lot of our programs of revitalization for the downtown would die along with it. And really...
And the possibility exists that the Business Improvement District would no longer be able to continue.
Absolutely. That would also die. This is all volunteers. All of us have jobs, and we're doing this as volunteers. So you see a lot of dedicated people sitting here today, and they're giving of their time freely and generously, and I can't tell you how valuable that is for the community.
And I do want to thank you all for the time you give. You create some wonderful, fun activities throughout our community, and it does take a lot of time out of your busy job, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Also, just as a comment, they are not totally dependent just on the city. They have structured their contract with their executive director as an incentive for her to go out and raise funds and support through the private donations of the organization in the Main Street. So it's not something that they're just totally dependent on the city. It is something that they understand that private donations are very critical to the survival of the whole operation.
So the city's contribution represents about a third of our budget right now.
Thank you, Terry. Anybody else from the public would like to speak to the council?
Mr. Mayor, just a question.
Sure.
When will we deal with their matter? Is that going to be?
We're going to do it first. We're going to move the non-departmental up to the very front, which would be page 55 in your book.
Okay, and before you do that, I have some points of information that I would like to discuss before we begin the formal hearing, if you
Sure.
please.
And your name and address for the record, please, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Glenn Brovant. I live at 702 Lantana. I am on the Finance Committee, so I'd like to speak to a couple issues, maybe from a historic point of view. When I look back on our capital report for the last 10 years, I'd highlight a couple things to you that I think are critical. One, the population of the city has declined by 14% over the last 10 years, although the population space is the same. Two, if you analyze page 133 in the capital report, it clearly shows that separate and apart from the police department, there are four categories in there. Separating out the police department, the general cost of running the government over that 10 years is about 1% more than it was in 2002. That's without counting inflation. Now, the next thing you'll see quickly is that our allocations, right? Our allocations to physical environment's down. Our allocations to the transportation is down. The thing that glares at you, and there, in my opinion, there's no solution to the budgetary problems the city faces without approaching the big problem. And that's the problem nobody wants to talk about. That's the elephant. It's the police department. Now look at what happened to the police department. The general government's down, is up 1%, 10 years. The police department, public, they call it public safety, 90% of it is the police department. The police department is up over the 10 years, 39%. Everybody else is down or flat. Police department's up. Now that's not due to the size of the police department. The police department has declined from 90 to 74. So it's not the size of the police department. It is, in fact, the pay schedules. If you take the budget that's shown, the actual results in 2012, you will find If you divide the total public safety cost by the number that's on our payroll, that section drew off almost $100,000 per employee allocated to the police department. It did back in 2012, back in 2002, it only cost $61,000 per police officer to run it. Now, I submit the police department has taken on nearly a $2 million increase over the 10 years, while everybody else is down and out. It's sort of interesting. I went back and analyzed the cost of running the city, excluding the police department. In 2002, it was $57,000. In 2012, it's $73,000, while the employees declined from roughly 184 to 129. The only thing you can construe from those figures is that the county and the city staff has been very efficient on running their operation. How else do you account for the fact that they could take more money and yet did it on less people? So the fact is they've done it better than most people give us credit for, the city gives credit for. If you analyze where we're going, the police department right now is sucking off 39% of the whole budget. Going forward this year, without considering the next couple of years, going forward this year, all departments have taken roughly a 4% decrease in pay, in costs. They're going down. The police department has taken a little dip. Everybody took about a 6.5. Police department says they took about a 4. But if you analyze that carefully, there's a little bit of window dressing going on here. Because within the report, the budget, the police department has allocated about roughly $300,000 for CapEx program to facilitate their transfer of our city employees onto the county. We're going to lose, theoretically, in this budget, 14 employees out of the police department, which are the low-cost help. And where is it going? It's going to the county, and we're going to give the county a contract for what, 4 or 5 years? And then what? Then we're a captive of the county, increasing their cost to us. At some point, the employees have to get paid. And if we don't pay it directly to the police officers, we're going to pay it to the county at some point. Now, I submit this can't continue to go on. This is not sustainable. Now, I know the police department will tell you they're doing a better job, and they probably are. But if you analyze their budget carefully, you will see 90% of their budget is in the payroll. They are living on fumes in the gas tank. Less than 10% of their whole budget is allocated. Cars, to keep up the cars, the gas, bullets, training, you name it. It isn't there. They're cannibalizing their total asset structure. And worse, they're cannibalizing the city. This is just not sustainable. If we can't get control of the police department, we can't continue to drive the cost out of the city on the back of everybody else. Won't work. And we all know we have a unionized police department. And that's difficult to contend with. But I submit, too, if you think back, one of our presidents, Mr. Reagan, had the same problem with some other main division of the United States government. And he looked them in the eye and said, guys, this doesn't work. Either we get control of the cost, or we find a new police chief, or maybe We have to find a whole new police department because we can't continue to go on with paying the police department substantially more than the rest of our people. Won't work. And we are dividing our people in twos, the have-nots and the haves. So that's one issue. Now, and I look back on the record and say, okay, is the police department stopping more people? Are they arresting more people? Are more people in jail? Hey, the capital records do not support that. It's all in the records, and you can find it. So I think, in my mind, this budget we're going through is sort of a charade. I've looked at every budget for every division, and you see the same pattern. All payroll, very little support. Everybody is operating on fumes in the gas tank, 10 or 12%. I've run businesses. You guys have run businesses. You know we can't run a business on a 10% variable overhead to support the staff. It won't work. And the truth is, if you look back in the record, over 10 years, we are becoming more and more dependent upon the business entity funds. And those business entity funds may be going away. And even if they don't go away, we can't continue this pattern. It won't work. And worse, there are things that don't show in the financial statement, the operating statement that show on the balance sheet, and nobody wants to talk about that either. We have an employee program. Every time we dismiss somebody, it costs us a bundle. In small numbers on the budget this year, it cost us $300,000 to exit, 30 employees. I think that's about right. If you look at the footnotes, and it's not on the balance sheet, if you look on the footnotes, you will find exit costs for employees, actuarially put together, about $44 million. Our unfunded payroll, our unfunded pension fund, added together, police department, fire department, our employees, another $47 million unfunded. And that's taking a good view of the pension fund. The pension fund, as all pension funds are in the state of Florida and every place else in this country, are alleged shortfalls. They're much more than that. They all show a 7.5 to 7%, 7.5 to 7.75 return on capital. Guys, you all got mutual funds. You all look at your bond records. Have any of you generated 7.5% return on a 10-year hold in the last 10 years? Do any of us think we can project our funds out on a 7% return? Not in the market, not in the bond market. And I submit you guys in the real estate, and I'm in it. We haven't done that either. So I think if you really analyze the pension funds, we're not shortfall. We're not short funded, $44 million. Probably closer to 65 to 70 million. Now, I hear these grandiose deals, and I've been on the finance committee too, that we can solve all the problems by selling a utility. It's going to generate, maybe it'll generate $35 million. Again, take $35 million and stack up against our employee costs, $40 million, unfunded payrolls, $47 million, $80 million, and I guarantee you, if I was doing this on my own corporation, trying to get this done, I'd be in jail. All my liabilities have to be on the balance sheet. You guys are operating the whole company not on the balance sheet. Doesn't work. Last 3 years, if you looked at your balance sheet, you will find, sort of unannounced, quietly done, we have recorded $12 million more real liabilities on the balance sheet, let alone the $44 million I was talking about before. This city, if you took our fund liabilities of $35 million, subtract the $44 million, subtract the unfunded pension funds, $39 million, we are quickly at a negative net worth of about $45 million. Even if we sold the pension fund, we're still underwater. Now, we can probably solve these problems, but we can't solve these problems if we won't address the problem. The problem is the police department. That's what it is.
Thank you, Glenn.
I'd be glad to talk it over. You guys go to page 133 and look at the financial statements. Yeah. That's where it is. And the public should do it too.
Are there any questions for Glenn? Thank you, Glenn.
Okay.
Anybody else would like to speak to the council? Hey, Rock, I see you thinking over there. Okay. Jim, you want to make an opening statement, comments?
Mayor, we would, both myself and Cindy, have a few comments. One is I hope everyone has read the memorandum that is dated June the 28th, 2013, which we sort of outlined how we put this budget together and the premise that we worked on. And one of the assumptions that we had was the sale of the electric utility to FP&L. And as requested by the City Council in that May 14th meeting, we bifurcated this budget. And that bifurcation, I think, is sort of a misleading process. We tried our best to try to put those numbers together, and I think Cindy will go into a little more detail than that, and we would like you to sort of maybe possibly reconsider some of that. We also put an Appendix B in here that gave you sort of an overview if we did not bifurcate the budget and propose the sale as to how it would work. The other thing is that we were not able to reach the 10.9% that was discussed in that May 14th budget workshop. We do have some numbers in there. If, in fact, the council wants to still proceed in that, we are not recommending it, but if you want to still proceed down that path, we show you where you can make some budget cuts, but those cuts would require some policy decision and reversals of previous policies, at least over the last couple of years in which we've addressed. But at this time, I would like to turn it over to Cindy. She sort of really spearheaded a lot of the budget discussions with department directors. Cindy.
All I wanted to do was take a moment because, as Jim pointed out, we did sort of split this budget in half, which added a little level of complication to the numbers, to go through the assumptions and how they impacted what's in front of you before we get down into the details, particularly on the general fund, which has the biggest impact. The assumption that the sale of the electric utility happens at the end of the first half of the year affects two really important things in the general fund. First, the revenues. You'll see things like the administrative charges are lower. The electric utility transfers are half of what they were in prior years. We show some franchise fees and other sources of revenue from FP&L, but only at the 6-month level. It also affects the expenses. The biggest way in which it does that is we assume that halfway through the year, we stopped making payments against that unfunded pension liability. So we achieved half a year of the savings of paying down the unfunded pension liability through proceeds from the sale. There were some staffing changes in various departments that happened as a natural result of the sale of the electric utility. And again, we put those into this budget at 6 months' worth. And then things like utility costs, you'll see some lower numbers in some departments, again, predicated on the assumption that for 6 months of the year, we had FP&L rates on our utilities. And so both the revenues and the expenses were affected. And as Jim pointed out on attachment B, what I've done is taken the budget as it sits in front of you In the middle column, I've shown how the revenues or expenses would change if we were to not actually consummate the sale of the electric utility in the fiscal year in front of us. And that far right column shows you where the budget would sit if it did not happen, and yet we went forward with a budget assuming that it did. Bottom line, we would have about a $600,000 surplus if we adopted the budget as it sits now and we did not sell the electric utility before the end of this coming fiscal year. So that's just kind of to put that assumption in context as to how it affects this budget. The second thing that's critical is we, based on the direction we got on May the 14th, assumed that when we paid down that unfunded pension liability, we took the savings that it generated for water and sewer, for solid waste, and for the marina, and we reflected those as increased transfers into the general fund. And in order to provide at least a little clarity, I showed them as separate line items. There's the normal transfer from water and sewer, and then you'll see something labeled UAAL, which stands for unfunded actuarial accrued liability. Those are the extra transfers. And because we made that 6-month assumption, if you add those up, they come to about half of the $1 million that we thought that would be in any full fiscal year. And then finally, the 10.9% or the $2.2 million that we were driving towards, just to clarify, because we had this conversation with the Finance Commission the other day, that number was the number that the amount over and above the pension savings and the natural changes in staffing and utilities, et cetera, that occurred at the sale of the electric utility. What we had calculated based on our modeling was we needed another $2.2 million, which equates to 10.9%, in order to balance this budget with our projected revenues in the first full year after the sale of the electric utility. So that's the reason for that number that we're all talking about. It wasn't just sort of a pick a number. It was the amount that we felt would be needed along with the natural changes in order to balance a budget in one full fiscal year after the sale of the electric utility. The only other thing I wanted to say, and again, we had some of this conversation with the Finance Commission, this is a draft. This week we have a series of workshops, but we're by no means adopting anything until we get to September to our first and final public hearings. And so, as this was last year, this is a process. But we'll spend some time on it this week, have another meeting in August, and not till we get to September are we making any final decisions about what we're going to do next fiscal year. The only decision that has to be made this week is where to set the not-to-exceed millage. And remember, as we talked about last year, whatever tentative millage rate you set at the end of the week can always go down as we go through this process right up to that final public hearing when you adopt the final millage rate. So with that, I don't know if Jim wants to add anything, but...
Just two more comments. One is this is a balanced budget. I felt obligated to submit a balanced budget to the council within the guidelines that have been submitted to us and try to capture what it is that you all want to do. The second thing is, and this is the most critical part, the budget, when it is adopted, is the council policy position. It really reflects, hopefully, what the council in general really expects out of the upcoming fiscal year for the city organization to operate under. But it is a council policy. My budget to you is the proposal to try to balance, to give you a starting point in which to start working from.
Mr. Mayor, some points of information.
Go ahead.
Well, Jim and I have had a long dialogue, which Mark Schuman has written about. And Jim says I agreed to his May 15th letter. I made clear at the last council meeting I don't agree to it at all. And Mark did a good job of showing that I didn't agree to it in the meeting, nor did others. I want to be certain that there's no uncertainty as we address budget items where any of us stand. So if it's a major item, I'm going to want and require a vote and ask for a second on it. I think this... then I can't be misconstrued, and I don't want to be misconstrued again. And I realize it's a communication problem. There's nothing in that, but I do think that's so. I also would like to point out that as a result of the June 28th meeting between FMPA, OUC, the city, Florida Power and Light, that there's little or no chance that the electric will sell in the coming fiscal year. There's not one chance in 1,000. We might be able to sell it, and I hope we can, in October of 2016 when the ARPA release is there. We might be able to do it in October 2015 when the Taylor swaps have to be resolved. We might be able to do it when a private letter comes forth. One hasn't been started. We might be able to do it, our Plan A of how we were going to deal with the FMPA power and offload it to OUC, and they were going to offload it to Florida Power and Light has fallen through. Now there's talk of a Plan B, but there's nothing there. We have to have FERC and Justice. You know, I'm going to propose what I think is an intelligent, and I have other problems with this budget, many, and this is going to take more than 5 days as far as I'm concerned. But I think what we should do is tweak the 2012 and 13 budget and deal with that. I'm going to go into some of the questions I have about assumptions that are in this budget, and I'm going to make some statements about the budget. Cindy said a minute ago, this budget, if we did it as it's drafted here, would create a $600,000 surplus for 6 months. I make it at $900,000, but regardless. I would tell you there are hundreds of small items in here where this budget has got a budget proposal line of $2,500, and I'm going to be using the general ledger because it's much more accurate. We spent $31, and yet we have a $2,500 budget, or we have a $1,000 budget. We have a $500,000 budget. There are literally hundreds of numbers in here I do not agree with, where expenses or revenues I do not believe are accurately stated. I want to make clear to the public that I will vote for anything that improves the efficiency of the government, regardless of the sale of electric. But if it's predicated upon this electric is going to be sold and we're going to make draconian cuts, we're going to get rid of things that could cost lives like 911 or the lifeguards, I'm going to vote against it because there's no need at this point in time to do that. My own work shows that at most we have a 2.5% shortfall if we do all the intelligent things. You know, this budget proposal ignores restructuring. I'll be bringing some of those up early on, how I want to restructure the city manager's office, the city council, and the clerk's office, and I'll be doing that as we go through. And, you know, this budget is like so much that happens around here, and I'm getting frustrated with it. We get the electric contract, and we get a few days to look at it, and it's hundreds, 500, 800 pages long. We get all this material, and we have to go through it. We're not really given the assumptions. For instance, what is the pension contribution that is in this? How do I ascertain that? I can back figure it by using a general ledger. There are some sick pay. Now we're funding sick pay. That's probably a good idea, but those caveats were never given to us. Vacation pay, the same thing. What are we doing with holidays? And there's lots of assumptions in here about apparent assumptions about negotiations yet to take forth with various unions. And so we have assumptions in here about wages and pensions and so on that we cannot justify. I do not know what the assumption is on transfer. In other words, I made the proposal that we have a second transfer to utilize some of the pension funds. The power cost assumptions, apparently the reduced power cost in the water and sewer is an example. Assuming the sale takes place is cranked into the numbers. We're not told that up front. I really think this budget is fatally flawed. I really do. And I would humbly submit that what we do is we go back to the 12-13 budget and tweak that in light of the electric is not going to sell in the coming year. So thank you for listening to me.
Any other comments?
Jim, I have a question. Have there been any communications within the last week with representatives from FP&L in terms of the current timeline?
Yes, there has. As a matter of fact, I was on the phone with them this morning in order to sort of prep going into the budget process. It's very critical. We are negotiating, and you can pull the Plan A and you can pull the Plan B and you could do whatever you want to do, but there are a lot of discussions going on. The contract between OUC and FP&L has not changed. The fact of the matter is that OUC is obligated to take our power supply contracts, and FP&L is required to purchase that power for 3 years. That started in 2013 or 2014. the business terms of those, and I'm just using that as one element. Is there a possibility, and I believe, as Mr. Winger said, it may be 1 in 1,000, it may be 1 in 100, it may be 1 in 50, but there is a possibility that you could close this deal. Coming back to the assumption in what I prefaced this on, that I think it is misleading to bifurcate the budget. I think what we need to do is sort of set the policy. What is our expectation when the sale takes place? But if the sale takes place in April the 1st, 2014, or if it takes place November the 1st, 2014, or if it takes place April the 1st, 2015, those are going to be partial budget years, and that's when you will address the issues of the sale. If the sale takes place 2014 and April the 1st, we will have the revenues to get through that budget year, and going into the next fiscal year, and the budget policies will have to be set by council at that point. Now, you can take, as Mr. Winger said, take this budget and sort of use that, which is what we call it a draft, as use that as the footprint moving forward. If we're going to try to accomplish to reduction of the organization through cuts as opposed to additional revenues or a combination thereof, this budget is sort of setting in that direction. And based on the vote of the, and Mr. Winger and I have talked about this many times, based on votes of the council. For example, last year we didn't even take the rollback rate. So the message sent, right, wrong, or indifferent, and it is a communication issue, the message sent to me was property taxes are not an eligible revenue stream to count on as you move your budgets forward. Again, it was a communication thing. Another thing, on the May the 14th, there was at least one of the council members who said, have the city manager bring us a budget back at 10% reduction and we will correct it from that point. And I took that, again, it may have been a communication issue, but I took that, do the cuts and you bring it back. And that's the goal and that's the objective we're doing. But again, knocking around this budget, kicking it, changing it, whatever you want to do is not an issue with me. I put a budget proposed, and we tried to make, for example, we've had executive sessions on the union negotiations and tried to clarify where we are going and get direction from council. We addressed some of those issues. We did put projections in here based on the assumptions and what the city council has told us in our negotiations, what they expect us to achieve. And we have to take that and move forward in that line. Again, it's a communication issue. And I'm trying to read what you guys are trying to do, and we're putting that into our documents, and we're also putting it in to our operational policies as an organization. There has been no indication from anyone that I'm aware of that we can count on additional revenues to carry our budgets forward. We have to do what is necessary in order to bring that down. We've heard people say that, if this was an organization or my business, then you're upside down. And I agree. But if I was in a business, what I would be doing is shedding those portions of the business that are not holding their own. We can't do that because we are obligated to provide some services. Mr. Winger sent me some pictures of parks around town where the grass is growing. And those are issues as to where you put your priorities. One of the things that we did in anticipation of this budget, and it was not the meat axe going through, is we prepared as an organization to come into these budgets. So we started leaving a lot of positions vacant. We still will have to lay people off. There will be people who will get their last paycheck prior to October the 1st if you adopt this budget. But there's an awful lot of positions that we've held open, and we've sort of cut back on where we can do some of that work. But you can't take 10 people out of mowing, as an example, and I know that's a trivial thing to some people, but it's not if you live next to one of our parks. You can't take 10 people out and expect the same frequency of providing that service. It's going to change. You can't have and reduce the number of police officers and expect to have 2 people on the beach, 2 people on the mainland, and the 5th person traveling to and from the thing. If you reduce the the number of police officers, you're not going to see in one of those locations as many police officers.
Jim,
Van-
your rhetoric, I understand your rhetoric, but I'll just make it simple. With an unlikely sale, 1 in 1,000 of the electric this fiscal year, I am not willing to cut back on lifeguards and risk somebody's life on the beach, and I'm not willing even to get rid of the tennis pro, predicated upon the fact that we may sell it with where we are, because the reality is we're a long way from getting it done. And you know, I've submitted a proposal on that also for next city council. I don't believe we're getting there, and we need to get there. But I will not vote for getting rid of things predicated upon that we might sell it. It makes zero sense to me.
It's not a question of getting rid of it. It's looking for those efficiencies. And I'm delighted that you said, yes, you will continue to vote for efficiency. I would like to thank Mr. O'Connor and Cindy and all the staff for making an effort to get to this 10.9% reduction. I mean, the city can no longer be structured to survive on the electrical transfer. The city voters have agreed to that. Our customers have agreed to that. The days of the electrical transfer are over. This is the time to study our operation, to make it as efficient as possible, to make the cuts, the things that we can outsource, we can do better, we can cross-train. This is the time to do it. And this is why we're taking such a severe hash through our budget to look at getting more efficiencies. We need to make these cuts now. We cannot continue to inspire our workforce by telling them, oh, no, we're not going to do this year, but, the electrical sale may come next year or another time, so we're going to keep postponing this. So, hang on. You're not going to get it. We don't have any money for raises. We can't reward our employees because we're going to continue in this cutting base. Let's make the cuts now. Let's make it as efficient as possible so as our economy improves, we can reward our employees. I mean, we have gone 5 years without raises. We have reduced the pay for our management staff by 5%. We've gone through furloughs. We have to position our city the most efficiently so that we can be in a position to reward our employees.
Well, we're figuratively and literally at opposite ends of the table, and I'm certainly for any improvement in the efficiency. I only say to you that when we come to something like Main Street or something like 911 and it's a major issue, I think we have to stand on our record, and I think we have to vote.
And that's fine. I think there are certain things that we're not willing to eliminate from the budget, Mr. Winger, but I think there's still many other things that we can take another look at and, as you said, restructure, reorganize, find efficiencies. And I look forward to working with you together this week to come up with those.
It'll be a long week, but I look forward to it too, Mrs. Turner.
Tracy?
I would just like to thank Jim and Cindy for the immense amount of work that it took to put this together. We did, and if you disagree, I was very much under the impression that we did give you marching orders at that meeting, and we asked that you bring this together. And you, two individuals, have been under a tremendous amount of public scrutiny with this, because some of the concepts that you have in this budget impact the citizens of our community, whether they are residents who have moved here and participate in the tennis program, or whether they're children looking at their recreational activities, or whether they're kids that want to go to the fountain, or businesses, and how that will impact the continuation of our downtown activities and events. And you guys have been under a lot of flack, and I appreciate that. I've been under flack once or twice myself, and it's hard to do, but I appreciate the work that you did for that. From my standpoint, I will continue to look at each of these items as our other members will as well, in terms of who I have always stood for represented in our community, and that's our business community and the families. So when things come forward for discussion and they affect tourism, for instance, the lifeguards, our beach is going to be protected as they are now. I'm going to be looking at the tourism and how that affects our business community. And when things come forward to possibly not have the Hibiscus Festival or have events in our downtown area based on cuts that have been proposed, I'm going to be going back over and over to how that affects our businesses and our families in the community. So I just want to preface my comments for the next week based on those two promises I've made.
Jay, you have any opening comments?
Well,
I'm trying to stay fairly quiet on a lot of these things, but I just got one thing to say. Well, since we're talking about efficiency, efficiency is really quite simple to figure out. It's just output divided by input. And you can go through and you can see a lot of these things that are taking place, and you can see what effect it has on efficiency. Obviously, if we outsource our lawn mowing and it makes our city look pretty bad, we've reduced our services, but we haven't adjusted our taxes. Our efficiency went down. We can make adjustments anywhere we want, but if we're going to increase efficiency, then we simply need to see that we're going to be getting more services for paying less. In this budget, I don't see that. I see that the denominator stays the same as far as the amount of money that we pay into the system, but the services are getting cut back quite a bit, which tells me the efficiency of the city is dropping like a rock, and I'm just not impressed with this.
Okay, we've some people in the audience that we wanted to get their items up front, and in your blue book on page 55. General fund, non-departmental. Let's start out with that one. And Jim, the first thing I saw, of course, was the 4th of July. Do we have a co-sponsor with that now currently?
The way that we placed the 4th of July into this particular budget was to make it neutral to the city. You'll notice in the revenue side, there's $15,000 in revenues. In the expenditure side, $15,000 in expenditures. The reality of the situation right now, as in this year, is that there's a disconnect of probably $3,000-$4,000. We've spent more like $17.5 for 18. We've been taking in more like $12.5 or $13, although we've tried to enhance revenue with beer sales and a few things like that. So hopefully everyone went down and did their part toward that end last week. But so I guess what we're proposing is we'll work harder on sponsorships, maybe dial back some of the activities if we have to make it so that we can throw the 4th of July without any impact to the city in terms of dollars out of pocket.
Comments from others?
I have one comment of a general basis, and that is in looking at this budget, I'm looking at the page 55 you just referenced, and I see on the far right-hand corner actuals from 2012. I see the 2012-13 budget, the 2012-13 projected, and in almost every case, those two numbers are exactly the same. How is it a true projection if you are not utilizing the numbers as of the date this was actually done and giving a true projection of what it will be? I don't see on this paper the actuals to date of this budget to let me know exactly where we're going. I know we get the documentation each month in terms of variances to the budget, but for me to cross-reference between 3 or 4 manuals in front of me would be very difficult.
The reason that we did that was actually by design, and I'm glad you brought it up. At least for this go-round of the budget, the change, if you look at that column, the third one in, sort of in the middle, the change between 2013 and 2014 is reflected as a change between the projected amount and the new budget, not the previous budget and the new budget. And so these numbers were very difficult to compare to the prior year anyway because of the bifurcation. So for this round of the workshop, I left the 2012-13 projected the same as the prior year budget so we could have at least a chance at clarity between what we have proposed for this year and what we have in the current year. The other thing is, if you've been kind of watching the quarterly variances, at least as of last week when we spoke with the Finance Commission in the general fund, we don't have any things that are huge variances of any significant line items. And so at this point, we probably are proposing not to do a budget amendment until August or so that would probably carry us through for just one. We've done, I think, a good job in the last couple of years of putting budgetary controls in place, of doing quarterly analysis to the point where we're not going to end up ending this fiscal year with a giant surprise, $800,000, the kinds of things that were happening for a while. And so it's kind of a combination of those two things. When we come to our August workshop, by then we'll have put together a proposed budget amendment, and we'll throw those budget amendment numbers in. But just to add another level of it's difficult to compare to this was something that we thought at this point maybe would be best not to do. If you want, I can run down through a couple of these things that are very different than the current fiscal year, though, just to explain where they came from and what the assumptions are.
But just to highlight something that's very important there, at our presentation with the Finance Commission last week, the variance differences have been really very, very good this year. A lot of the department heads, or all the department heads, really need to have the appreciation showed to them because they've captured their budgets. They've really worked with their budgets. And we've engaged, for example, the Marina Commission is now more engaged in the budgeting process than ever before. So I think we're getting the attention of the total organization and making some of that work. And so our variances are getting to a manageable style. That's not to say if a hurricane hits or something like that makes it work, but on our normal day-to-day operations that the department directors, I think, are taking ownership of those departments.
Tracy, I have here, and I will read out numbers as we go through. The only way truly to answer your question, there is none on the 4th of July because 4th of July just happened. But I have a general ledger. And unfortunately, our monthly statement really isn't an income statement or a balance sheet. It's a highlight statement. So if you really want to know, you got to have a general ledger. So in this particular case, the general ledger is 0 for the 4th of July because it just happened.
Right.
So there's no history to gain or learn from.
Cindy, did you want to go through a couple of examples of?
Sure, just the big ones. Up at the very top, where probably a good portion of the dollars are, the reason that there's a fairly big number in the state unemployment compensation and also in the sick and annual leave payout is those numbers are attributable to the actual layoffs that this budget contemplates in the general fund for October the 1st. We have a maximum amount of unemployment compensation that people are entitled to across 26 weeks. We also have sick and annual leave payouts for the specific people whose jobs are scheduled for reduction. And so those numbers there are really, if you will, one-time costs that if, again, always the big if, we adopted this budget as is, you'd see those once. You wouldn't see those again in a coming fiscal year unless you made further layoffs. So that's the idea behind those numbers, both here and in other non-departmental budgets, is they're predicated on the actual layoffs and the actual people contemplated to be laid off.
Cindy, before you go on, that would imply that after we get to Friday and we make changes in this, because I'm sure there'll be changes one way or another, these numbers are going to have to change. Is that not correct?
Correct.
In other words, these numbers are meaningless right now.
Well, they match up to the budget in front of you, but if you restore positions, if the positions that are restored are ones that are actually filled and not vacant, then yes, these numbers would change. And if you back to the cover memo, you saw that the changes that we made at October 1, down below there, you saw a number that said one-time costs associated with layoffs, $300,000. That's these two things right here. So, coming down a ways, the street and highway lighting shows a reduction, again, predicated on a sale halfway through the year. That number is about 10%. There may be some improvement to that. Working with the electric utility department right now to try to figure out if that's actually more improved once we sell the electric utility. Airport land rent goes down only because this budget in my department contemplates that at the sale of the electric utility, we will do away with the warehouse facility, move purchasing into the hallway with finance, and cross-train and combine those two departments for more efficiency. The insurance number, right now we don't have updated insurance quotes for general insurance and things like that from the league, so we're rolling with this year's actual numbers, and that may well change, probably not for the good, but we'll see. We'll know before August. On the second page there on 56, the big one that kind of sticks out, and it's, again, because of the variation, has been a little difficult to capture in budget comparisons, is that debt service transfer to the Series 2012B. It's only $19,000 for the current fiscal year. It's $690 for next year. Again, that's because 2 years ago when we refinanced, we made our early debt service payment and made it so that in 12-13 we had interest only. And so you can see across those 2 years that early payment and the refinancing really kind of obscure these numbers, but that's the real debt service payment that we have going forward through 2016. And then the transfer to recreation is down, and that reflects the proposed cuts in the recreation department, as well as pension savings.
Right. Thank you. Back on page 55, of course, the big item is the Main Street Vero Beach, $25,000. Mr. Wingard mentioned that.
I will make a motion to retain that expenditure.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
And just for discussion, I was going to say this is less than 0.1% of our total budget. I think our return on this 25 grand is tremendous, and I would certainly move forward with this.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? The motion was to retain the 25. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It passes.
Jim, I see that we do have a $30,000 line item for dune restoration near the end of the page. We have found the last 2 years we have needed $60,000 to $100,000 for dune restoration.
152 this past year.
152. Thank you. I was a bit low.
Well, so far this year is 161,554.
You know, that's one that I tell you,
What
I would love to have
do?
a conversation about that. You know, for probably 5 or 6 years running, it was zero. So putting in 30 to the budget every year theoretically created a 30, all other things being equal, which they never are, $30,000 a year surplus. And then in your fifth year, when you needed $150,000, it was there.
But were we actually putting it away somewhere to hold forward?
Balance forward should have reflected.
If every other single line item in the budget remained the same from
Exactly.
the adoption of the budget to the end, then your balance forward went up by that much. In reality,
No.
No.
and so maybe
The short answer is no.
maybe it's time to actually designate formally reserve a portion of the general fund balance for dune restoration. Put 30 grand into it every year, increase it by that much, and then buy it down when you need it, and take it out of the budget because it introduces such, it's the perpetual
Right.
variance. It's
And
either
with
going to be high or low.
With our current county administration, they have, as Jim and I have fought over and over for the last 2 years, there's no desire at all to share the tourism tax dollars with the city for the dune restoration. So it's something that we need to recognize, and as long as the current county administration stays the same, there's no money coming from them for us. So I believe that putting it aside like that would be a fiscally sound idea.
With council's permission, I'll come back with a proposal for reserving and budgeting for this differently so that it doesn't create
idea.
big variations from year to year in the operating costs if you want.
Cindy, the only comment, I agree with what Tracy said 100%, but I would make the comment the year before, I believe it was 82. This year it's 161. We have 240,000 in 2 years. This is supposed, of course, the weather, I'm almost glad to hear them say this is going to be the worst season we've ever had because they're almost always wrong. But I don't think $30,000 is enough. I mean,
I'd like to look at 10 years' worth of actuals and see it across the last decade and come back with a recommendation if that's okay with you guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
And work with Bonnie on that one, too.
Okay, let's go back to the blue book and start up front on the general revenues.
before we do that, in Christmas decorations, we've gone to 20,000 to zero. This year we spent 19,555, and I don't know. At the risk of violating an amendment of the Constitution, I like Christmas decorations. I don't want to get rid of them.
Jim, that is a rental fee, is it not? That we do not own those Christmas decorations. We rent those from a private corporation who then uses their own employees to place those on our lights and then take them down. And they connect to our electricity, and we pay for the electricity for those. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I understand that there are municipalities that own their own. I don't know if anyone has looked into what that purchase would be in utilizing our own individuals to place those up, and if that would be a possibility of going forward with FP&L as they take over the light.
I have worked in cities where we owned our own. You have two issues with those. One is that the storage of them and maintaining them over the year, and by the time you pull them out, and you try to put them back up, the cost of that time involved of the people taking them down, renovating, replacing light bulbs, putting them back up, exceeds what you would ever pay in rental. The other thing in the rental, you get to pick as to what, if there is any modernization of the type of lighting that you would have. For example, if you wanted a low-cost type of lights, that you could do that as opposed to the city owning and trying to operate. I would never recommend that you own your, as long as we can get by,
Okay.
if we want to rent.
And then I would next like to ask our attorney if they feel that having a line item on our budget for Christmas decorations would be against the separation of church and state.
To be on the safe side, you'd probably want to change that to holiday decorations. It's the only suggestion I could make.
And the reflection, the type of decorations that we put up really do reflect a holiday and not necessarily a religious holiday.
If I could say, I know I put up on the agenda that the other organizations could have the opportunity to put up their lights themselves, and we would help pay for that in partial. It might not be a bad idea to let, like Main Street, the OBA, the Borough Palm Point, let those guys put up the holiday decorations and let them absorb a lot of the cost. They're there. They could probably do it cheaper than us anyway.
We have proposed that. For example, I've talked to the Oceanside Business Association. There's no one that I'm aware of in Miracle Mile as an example, but I have talked to the Oceanside Business Association. They have, at this point, said that they don't really want any part of Christmas decorations. And the Main Street, I'm not sure that they are really prepared to take that on. But you have passed the resolution. We have made that offer forward to the folks if they want to do it. The question, I guess, is do we want to say you have to do it, or do we still maintain the option?
Figuratively, I'd like to make a motion that we retain this budget. I think getting rid of the holiday decorations, thank you, Wayne, in lieu of the slight chance of selling electric makes little sense to me. I mean, that's what I think. So I'll make a motion to keep this budget item, or reduce it if you like.
I'll second.
For discussion, once again, I think holiday decorations is something the city doesn't need to be involved with. This should be left to those business areas that wish to decorate, and leave it to those business associations or areas that want to decorate.
I agree. Any other comments? We have a motion on the floor to retain the $20,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
I did not vote on that. I'm not prepared at this point to vote on that. I want to see some numbers in terms of what's going on in the community, if there would be somebody that would come up with that, and if, in fact, this is a necessary aspect of government, if other communities, how they are addressing that. So I'm not. Yeah, I'd like to revisit this.
Okay. Time.
Well, there's no
Mrs.
time
Carroll.
like the present. That's an acquiescence. Silence is acquiescence.
Very well.
So we'll remove it as the budget predicted.
The motion.
Well, the motion was to leave it in.
Approve, which acquiescence would have said approve the measure.
And in the state of Florida, you have to vote.
That's true.
So.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
So
it would
we'll
retain
put the $20,000 back in.
back in.
Yes.
Retain the $20,000. Anything else on the general fund non-departmental? Let's go back to the front. Starting on page 5, general revenue, general fund revenues.
I did want to bring something up. By passing this non-departmental just now, I want to verify that the on page 56, part of this non-departmental general fund budget includes the transfers to recreation and some significant cuts to recreation. I just want to make sure that we have not approved that. We will be discussing that with recreation, which will then impact this general fund. Thank you.
Correct. That transfer goes.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, that transfer goes up and down.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we
to balance the
somebody doesn't come
recreation
back
budget.
later and say, "Oh, we passed
It follows through.
non-departmental," so we're coming back to that one.
Whatever changes you make in recreation when you review that budget, we will change this to reflect those changes.
Thank you.
On page 5, under general revenues, the first thing I came across, Jim, was the bulletproof vest partnership. I just want to make sure that Chief is okay with that. I'm looking and I'm getting a nod. Okay. Thank you, Chief.
And certainly when it comes to grants, particularly with regard to the police department, we apply for them throughout the year as it is anyway. And if we do actually get those grants and therefore there's some expenditure that's already budgeted, they can defray, or something that comes along we need to buy that we can get a grant for, we amend the budget accordingly. So we just sometimes can't count on them as we begin the year. This just to roll through these quickly, this budget is balanced, predicated on last year's millage rate. We did have about a 1.75% increase in our taxable property value, which, although small, I think is encouraging because it's the first time we've been able to say the word increase in about 4 or 5 years. The other sources of state shared revenue, local option gas tax.
Just before we pass over that, before it gets into print, that we're having a tax increase, it's about $70,000, so $80,000. So it's not a major significant impact on anything.
Yeah.
When you say tax increase, you mean funding coming in, revenue?
The assessed value is going to go up by about 1.7%, and we are projecting that the tax millage rate stays the same. And so if we stay with the same tax rate going into next budget year, there could be somewhere in the neighborhood of a $70,000 increase in revenues from ad valorem taxes. So it's a very small thing, but it's based on the increase of assessed values of properties throughout the community. And as people know, you have some assessments that have gone down and some assessments that have gone up, depending on where you are in the community.
And that's a result of the tax assessor, not us.
That is correct. We do not do that.
Right. It actually, basically what you're saying, this is the same thing. For the first time in a very long time, the rolled back rate is actually very tiny bit lower than last year's rate as opposed to being a tiny bit higher. So it's about
Cindy,
58 grand.
Would you comment on the administrative charges? There's a huge number there that 36%. Is that a...
That's purely a function of the assumption that we sell the electric utility at the middle of the year. This matches up nicely with the modeling that we've done in terms of the amount that the entire year's admin fees would go down by if we had no electric utility for the whole year. What does happen is when you take out the electric utility, the administrative charges by department are allocated for each department on some objective basis. So, for instance, the human resources costs are allocated on the basis of the relative number of full-time employees in each fund and division. Well, when you take out the electric utility, the water sewer utility employees as a percentage of the whole go up. And so it's not as simple as to just chop out the electric utility part. It moves around a little bit, but this matches up pretty well with with our model. And if you assume no sale of the electric utility, that goes right back up to pretty much where it was last year. Yeah.
A couple of questions. On utility taxes, you have those declining by 10%?
Right. Again, with our modeling, we showed that because of the difference in the cost of electricity under FP&L, since it's based on sales, it would actually decline slightly.
Okay.
But what you also see, again, let me go ahead and just point out the ones that are completely predicated on half a year's worth of no electric utility, because we seem to be kind of hitting them all. Utility taxes do go down just a slight bit because of the differential in rates between us and FP&L. You'll see up there above that, a couple of lines above that, an actual electric utility franchise fee. This would be 6 months of revenue from the 6% franchise fee that we voted on a couple of meetings ago. Again, if we don't sell the electric utility, that becomes zero. Going down to the administrative charges, we just spoke of those. Those go down fairly substantially. Going down to fiber optic rental, you'll see a line item there, $362,000,200, $120,000. Again, that's half of the $240,000 a year we're projecting that we get for rental of the fiber optic facilities after the sale of the electric utility. Right below that, you see rental of power plant site, $750,000, half of the $1.5 million. Again, that would change if we change our sale assumption. Down to up a little to interest on investments. You know, that number's up, again, because our model assumes we'll have a lot more money invested once we have excess proceeds from the sale of the electric utility. You go down to the contribution from the electric fund. That's roughly half because of the 6-month sale assumption. You see the contribution from the water sewer fund. This is what we talked about earlier. Just under it is another contribution labeled contribution from pension unfunded actuarial liability. This is the amount of savings that are generated from paying off that unfunded pension in the water and sewer fund for half of a year. And the direction we received, at least on May the 14th, was to show that as an increased transfer to the general fund. And the same thing holds true going down through solid waste and marina.
Contribution from I'm sorry, the contribution from the water sewer fund, I was under the impression that the water sewer would be more would be saving money on their electrical expenses, and that their contribution would then increase.
Well, the normal contribution from these other funds is based on 6% of their revenues. The savings of the pension plan isn't affected by any changes in rates or expenses. It's purely based on us paying off the unfunded pension liability on behalf of the water sewer fund. That's half a year's worth right there.
Understood. I was referencing directly above that, the contribution from the water sewer fund, not the water sewer fund pension.
But it's 6% of revenues, so the revenues aren't affected by the changes in expenses. What is affected by the changes in expenses is the surplus that's created. So yeah, our rule of thumb for the transfers from other utilities is it's 6% of customer revenue. And that kind of roughly equates to a franchise fee, if you will, as a return on investment.
Mr. Mayor, for discussion, this is for discussion. This page is fundamental to this whole week exercise. I guess it is going to be a week. And what I mean by that is you adopt this page, which I would not be willing to adopt. You're casting pretty much in stone that you're going to sell the electric this year when we know that's highly unlikely. In other words, take the administrative change or the utility tax for the fun of it, or the electric the plant rental. You know, you're creating revenue which the odds are highly against creating, and that's going to make kind of a push and pull you. I mean, you know, you can never budget against that if it doesn't happen. I don't see it. I mean, to me, I would go back to the 12, 13, adjust it for what we really expect, but selling the electric's not going to happen. We know it.
Mr. Mayor, I just, we could go through and micromanage things, but I mean, the purpose of this whole week, once again, is for us to arrive at a maximum millage rate. Yeah. Any changes we want to make in here or tweaks, we're to give staff direction, but yeah, what our goal is this week, once again, is to get to that maximum millage rate we're willing to go to.
And once again, this budget, these numbers, this page specifically, reflects the instructions we gave to the city manager. They assumed that, as we told them, that the sale would take place on that date. Whether it will or not is a good question, but that's the assumption they made in presenting these numbers. Cindy?
If we could, can we take out the memo and look at attachment B? Because I know when we first talked on May the 14th about this budget, it was, we had some discussion about adopting two budgets, and that's really tough to do. But what I did was give you one sheet of paper that shows you, this is attachment B to your memo. At the top, you see the general fund revenues. And what you see in that left-hand column is the general fund revenues as they sit right here in this proposed budget in front of you. What you see in the middle column is how they would change if we do not sell the electric utility. And so what you essentially have here is, let's say, for argument's sake, we adopted this budget based on that assumption. Then halfway through the fiscal year, it didn't come to pass. What you see on attachment B is what your budget amendment would look like. Okay? So if that middle column, you see the franchise fees go away, the utility taxes go up, the administrative charges go up, all the things we just talked about. And in actuality, on the far right-hand column, you'll see that if you amended the budget, you would actually have higher revenues than what we're showing in this fiscal year 13-14 budget if we did not consummate the sale of the electric utility. In other words, the things that go away are overtaken by the extra revenue that we get.
Well, with that said, I did not agree that the electric would sell the year. Craig made the motion to move it from, I believe, December 31st to April 31st, but I have never believed it was going to close. And I would make the motion that we not accept this page with all these because they're not going to happen.
Do I hear a second?
Sure, why not?
Any discussion?
Just a comment. From the administration standpoint, whether it sells in April or doesn't sell in April or this fiscal year, it really is just a function to us of a budget amendment. But you could go back and, following with the motions being made, and adopt these numbers, as Cindy said, and we could replace that into this page. And if the sale does take place, then we bring back a budget amendment that reflects the other numbers. So whichever numbers you use, from our standpoint, we have no objection either way.
But of course, the concern remains that if we adopt all of the recommendations, we have some severe cuts to our services and to important things in our community. And if we go through the whole year, were those things we would have cut had it not been the necessity of approving this document today?
Which is where kind of that bottom line we talked about when we prefaced this comes in back on attachment B. If you put back the revenues to where they stand without the sale of the electric utility, and you put back on the expenditure side just those things that happen as a result of the sale of the electric utility, what you see in this far right column would be an amended budget that actually has about a $600,000 surplus. And that surplus would be the place where, for instance, this $25,000 we put back for Main Street, the $20,000 we put back for holiday lights could fill up to that much and still have a balanced budget. So that's kind of the reason for this page.
And as we get down into the other departments, those issues that everybody's expressed, that would give you the revenue stream in order to punch some of those back. But ultimately, if the sale does go through, as long as we all understand, that fiscal year that you go into is going to be your dynamic year.
Once again, we're not here to approve every page. We're here to review this, to get a philosophy, and to get our direction for what our max is going to be. Whether the sale takes place with the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, or the end of next year. The voters have said they want us to proceed with the sale. We have to address our budget as if the sale's going to happen.
I'm going to go back to what Tracy says. If you adopt this page and the following pages, you're in effect forcing, I'll call them draconian cutbacks. I'll stand on the motion. It was seconded. I'll call the motion.
Just real quick. I mean, sure. Whether the sale happens or not, everybody knows my position. It ain't happening next year. I mean, I don't see any waivers out there getting done. I don't see any movement on the Taylor swaps. I don't see a lot of the part of the contracts. They're blank pages. They're not even done. Even sections aren't even there. I know it's not going to happen next year. If you want to, I voted to go with this just because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see where the cuts were going to be. Quite frankly, I mean, I'd like to see to go to the rollback rate. If we end up with extra cash, I'd like to see the taxes go down. Efficiency says that if you're going to reduce services, you have to reduce taxes. Give it back to the people. The money in the hands of the people is much more valuable than money in the hands of the government. So, I mean, I don't want to see a $600,000 surplus unless we reduce taxes. A lot of these services, I don't think we need to reduce, but I wanted to see them. So I guess if you want to blame somebody, I was the deciding factor. But well, seriously, I wanted to see them.
No, and I would suggest if the sale does not occur, that you take those savings and you put it to reducing the electric rates.
Right. The whole reason this is here is because the council voted for an 10.9% cut. That's why we're seeing these pages.
No, sir, we didn't. I do not believe we voted for a 10.9% cut. We asked a budget to be prepared that looked at what the ramifications would be of a 10.9% cut.
Yeah, I misspoke. I think we just consensus.
Well, if
it wasn't a consensus.
We have a motion on the floor to reject this page. I don't know what you're going to do if you reject this page. Where do you want to go?
I want to go back and do what I initially said and take the 2012 and 13 budget and tweak that, because that's what we're really going to be living with. That's what I want to do.
And I would rather go through this exercise and discuss various line items which I feel are not acceptable.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem going through it, but you asked me what I would do. I mean, I think we still should go through it, Tracy. You and I agree on that.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that.
I think it's important for us to see this budget as if the sale will go through, so we will understand the impact.
Right.
That's exactly right.
I certainly say it's not a question of accepting or rejecting. I want to go through this exercise.
This is a review of the impact that would happen if the sale took place.
Well, there is a motion, and it is seconded. The motion is not to accept this page, and so why don't we call the question?
Well, I don't believe we're going to be accepting the particular pages and then moving on. Why don't we just go through it and then we can...
It was seconded.
We have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
What is the motion now?
Would you restate your motion, please?
The motion is not to assume that the electric is going to sell next year. Therefore, I would go to the 2012 and 13 budget and tweak it. That's the motion.
Are you saying on this page only or throughout the document?
I'm saying on this page only at this point.
If we're not changing rates, it's pretty useless to accept a page that has revenues on it. That's completely out of our control. I mean, we're not changing a rate here. We're not changing, contributions. I mean, it's revenue. It's a projection of revenue. It's if it was expenses, yeah, that's something we can control. But at revenues, it's a different story.
Well, I think we need to accept this page and move on with the assumption we're going to sell.
Well, go ahead.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
So what is it, 3-2?
Yes.
Can I
we
get
still
some
talk about it?
Can I get some clarification?
Because we don't know what the page is
Right.
going to be.
Now you've thrown everything into a mixing pot here.
Well,
It's not an accepting. It's just a continuing of review. This is a process. It's a discussion. We asked for a picture of what it would look like with the sale, and that's what we're going through. We're not going through to accept each page. I mean, obviously, if there's some items in it that we want to discuss or make sure we pull, but we are not approving a budget this week.
I know, but you just said we're not accepting this page, and that's what we just voted for, to not accept the page. So we did the same thing.
Can I just,
It's
if I could get
irrelevant.
some
Let's just keep going.
clarification?
Let's just keep going.
This page is not in a vacuum, so I need a little bit of clarification. The items here that are not affected by the sale of the electric utility have been updated based on 12-13 actuals and also, in many cases, on projections that come from the State Department of Revenue for state revenue sharing. These are good numbers for 13-14. If the motion is to not assume the sale of the electric utility takes place halfway through the fiscal year, not only does this page change exactly the way that I've shown in this center column, because of the only things here that are affected by the sale of the electric utility, the rest of the revenues have been updated based, again, on sources of forecasting that we use every year. But this page doesn't exist in a vacuum. If we assume there is no sale of the electric utility 6 months into the year, then all the pension savings, all these other expenditures that you see at the bottom of this page have to be adjusted accordingly as well, because the pension assumption is a big one. If we're not paying that off halfway through the year, that's $1.9 million across all the funds that will not be paid partway through the year. So I just want to make sure I understand the motion. If the motion is to do away with that assumption that we're selling halfway through the year, there are changes not only to this page but throughout the budget that are easy to put back. That's how I put this page together.
Cindy, may I and Mrs. Turner make a useful comment? Why don't we come back to answering her question on Friday after we've been through it?
Just so we have a basis to start from, could you all make a motion to adopt the assumptions on this B, which is what you're really saying, and that plugs some numbers in for us to work with, that when we present the budget or the numbers to you all on Friday, we have something other than a blank page. Right now, this would be a blank page. But if you do this is assuming that sale.
Jim, for discussion, if you present it two ways, yes, of course.
Okay.
I'm talking.
We did. Attachment B is in your memorandum.
No, I understand that, but the expenses all go through.
I have a question, Ms. Cindy. As far as the expenditures on attachment B,
Correct.
I believe we're just discussing revenues right now, though. Is that correct?
Yeah, revenues are what you've eliminated. That's
great. He's asking for
But
approval here.
if you eliminated revenues based on the assumption that we do not sell at the end of March, then you also have to make these changes at the bottom, which are completely predicated on the idea of the sale at the end of March. This page does not exist in a vacuum. It exists tied to an assumption that affects not only revenues but expenditures. That's
we
the clarification.
just want to make
I'm
sure
trying
when we give you all a document back with the changes that you've made throughout the week that we have something other than a blank page.
Okay, back to my question then. The expenditures that are listed in this attachment B, those that are on the original budget, if the sale doesn't go through, so these would still include the essentially 6.9% reduction that we've taken.
They do. If you look at attachment A, what those changes equate to are the 6 months of pension savings you see here in column C. and the personnel and operating costs of about $235,000 we propose to eliminate as a natural result of the sale of the electric utility. So those two columns added together are what come up to that 800 and some thousand here that would actually go back into the budget, because this is entirely predicated on the sale of the electric utility halfway through the year. These cuts over here in this column, the October 1st cuts, would remain.
Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Okay, screaming right along at the speed of dark.
I think you still haven't answered.
We haven't answered the question.
I can live with what Jim said, which is I can accept B with the amendments we're going to make as accurate.
Great.
So
And I concur with that.
Motion on that? We don't have.
And I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we have numbers put back.
no problem. That's why I did this page.
Page 6. Under warehouse, Cindy, I assume that also is a reduction because of the sale.
Part of it is a reduction because of the sale. Part of it is a reduction in response to the overall 10.9% at October 1st. Okay. So when we get to the specific departments, we can talk to you a little bit about what we're proposing to do both before and after the sale of the electric utility.
Mr. Mayor, I think if we skipped over page 6 and 7, they're residual, and 8 and 9, and they're just residuals of all the other pages anyway.
They're a compilation of all the other
Thank
prices.
you.
So let's go directly on to page 11.
Thank you. Your word's much better than mine.
City Council is pretty straightforward.
Well, we're talking about major cutbacks. And I personally think schools and meetings we should finance out of our grand salary. I decided not to go to a meeting for that reason, and I also pay $9,000 a year for my own insurance, and I think the time has come. We are part-time employees at best, and I believe the time has come to take those two out, which would save $25,000 a year.
I'd have to agree with that. I mean, what it basically says is that we've got a few council members that are paid more than others. Hey, if they don't take it out, maybe I'll take it this year as well. I could use the extra money.
If you look at your package, I've done a city council benchmarking for all of you with the help of Ms. Vach and Ms. Philo. All the backup material has been provided for you. I think the key thing to note here is that our city council budget is 33% lower than our benchmark cities. Our salaries are on target. And as far as health, life insurance, 4 out of 7 of the benchmark cities provide that, as well as Indian River County Commission, and the school board provides that to their council members. I would remind you that the remuneration of the council members is decided by charter, and it's a charter review committee issue. And I think that at least the city council has been running very efficiently.
Well, as a matter of efficiency of input over output, obviously if you don't have health insurance, the efficiency of the council increases. I don't think your job is going to change whether you have hospitalization or not. If you want efficiency, you get rid of it.
And I would point out that a majority of the city councils in the state of Florida are voluntary. There's some that get handsome salaries. There's some that are full-time employees. There's some like us that are part-time employees, but more of them than not are volunteer positions. And I'll make a motion to make those two changes: no more schools and meetings, and no more hospitalization insurance.
Just a point of order, as far as the council members' compensation, that is determined by a charter review committee. If you wish to call a charter review committee, that is fine. One has not been called since 2005, but they determine the benefits and the compensation for the council.
Wow.
It is an issue for a charter review.
How about the schools and meetings?
That certainly can be.
Yeah, but city council, they're employees. I find it interesting that we fight for some certain employees and not others. Again, I don't see any reason why we can't live by the rules that we place on everybody.
Well, if you want to play by the same rules, then we should get minimum wage. Damn sure don't get minimum wage.
Jim, do we
I wouldn't have a
offer
problem with
hospitalization insurance to part-time employees of the city of Vero Beach?
Not part-time employees.
There's no benefit offered to them.
Well,
That's
under
what I
healthcare-
thought. That's where I was going.
And that'll be 30 hours or greater. I think 30 hours is the benchmark under the new Health Care Act, assuming it gets implemented.
And have we ever asked city councilmen to punch in and out on a time clock to determine that they do 30 hours a week?
We consider them salaried. So we
That,
do not have.
again, is an important part. They're considered salaried employees, but we don't
Correct. Their
number their
compensation.
hours. So how will that fall under the new Health Care Act? I think we have someone from HR here who might be able to answer that. She's in the back.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if there is a difference. I'm truly, I don't know this answer. I'm asking the question.
Lynn George, Human Resources Director. Elected officials would not fall under it.
Even though they are considered salaried employees.
The actual healthcare reform does not consider them employees. The municipalities or county commissions can call them employees, but they don't consider them employees under the act.
Okay.
Because they're elected.
Okay. Any other comments?
Did we make a motion on that?
Well, I want to go one more point. I know from my own standpoint, I most likely put in 30 hours a week for city business. It could be more at some points, depending on meetings I go to and representation, myself representing the city at Treasure Coast League of Community Governments and a lot of other things throughout the community. And I guess we're getting down to the point that are we acting as full-time employees or are we not? Are we receiving a benefit that other employees who are part-time employees do not? And I think that's where we need to make the decision in terms of whether we offer that. I know historically that I believe you had brought up a couple years ago that insurance was offered to the city councilman because the salary was so low. I believe I heard that at some point. And if you want to, Tam, if you want to touch on that, when that was originally offered and why to the councilman.
I can't tell you when it was originally offered. Ever since I've been here, the city council has had that on the books where they have an option of taking the insurance or not.
And how long have you been here?
Almost 30 years now. I know that it was talked a little bit about in the Charter Review Commission when they had that a few years ago, but no changes were made. I can, pull out those minutes to see exactly what was discussed. But the option of having insurance for the city council has been around a long time.
And historically, what is the average of the 5 councilmen that take the insurance over the last maybe few years? I mean, can you remember a time when all of them were taking it? Can you remember a time when none of them took it?
It's usually been maybe 2 council member, 3 council member. I don't think it's ever been where all 5 council members have taken it all at once.
And predominantly the ones who would take it would be those who may not be working, is that correct? And their employer continues to cover their insurance?
Yeah, I would say that in most cases.
And I know in my case, I've never taken it simply because I have a small business and we have insurance. I know you probably have your own small business and you have insurance coverage through that. So it becomes more of a personal decision. Sure, I could get rid of my insurance and take this, but I don't feel that there's a need for me. I personally like my own better than going on this plan. So I worry that we are making what should be a personal decision to throw it into the political arena.
Yep, that's exactly what
and
we're
a lot
doing.
of city council members that they may be only on the council 2 years, 4 years. If they have insurance, they're not going to give up that insurance that they have and take the city's insurance only to have to find another carrier when they're not on council.
Right, and as a small business owner, it is very important that the business owner has the insurance as well because it can throw off the numbers for a small business and then you have a less percentage of your employees actually on the plan. So that's been my concern. I know you're a small business too, and I don't know if that was your concern as well. So I believe we need to keep all of those matters in the forefront when we make a decision on this.
Well, the concern is that, as a small business person and being a person that controls our own health care, I mean, I can, play with our plans and then take the city's insurance and actually make more money off of it and use it. to my advantage. The problem that I have is that you have certain council members that are extracting more value out of the public than other council members.
Well, that's a personal choice. If you don't want to, you don't. If you want to sign up for it, you can. It's one of the benefits that comes along with the job.
I'm a contract employee, and as such, I don't have any benefits. So I have Medicare, and I pay for my own supplemental insurance, which costs me $9,000 to $10,000 a year. And I choose not to be on it because I do this because I think it's important for the public, and I'm not trying to make money out of it. But that's my rationale.
Okay.
Let's move on then.
No, what about the schools and meetings?
I think we need to leave it just where it is.
Tammy, can you give a little backup for us in terms of what the major expenditure? Oh, you have that with you. Look at you. You're good.
For this year, City Council really has spent maybe close to $1,000 for schools and meetings. You have $9,000 in your budget, so not much has been spent at all for this year. I know that we have the Florida League of Cities conference coming up in August, and at this point, I haven't signed any council member up for that. So I know that the schools and meetings, one of the classes that council has always asked that new council members attend is the Florida League of Cities elected officials.
And I think that's very important. I know that I've attended at least one, I believe, this year of the League of Cities smaller meetings, and I just went on my own dime. I didn't turn in any, expense report or anything to drive down to, I think that was in Delray Beach. And a lot of the League of Cities training programs that they've been providing on specific areas have been in various localities around the state. I know you've attended some of those as well, and those are very helpful for continuing education for us. The League of Cities conference is a lot of relationships are made with others, but I concern myself with is it really the best bang for the buck when it's coming out of our taxpayers?
Those, for a new council member, they are important to go to the first one. But after you've been there 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times, like some of us, you find that it's the same person giving the same speech. It's just a different time frame. And that's why I personally haven't been going back to them. Been there, done that. They don't have any new information for me. But the thing of going to a new council member going for the training is really important.
Yeah, I think that first year that council really does get a lot out of that.
That's almost the demand.
And what does that run for an individual man?
I want to say probably $500-$600 by the time we pay for the registration and the expenses and travel. Some council take to travel, some don't.
Then I would propose that we cut that down to perhaps $1,500, and there may be opportunities that come up where we find that it's necessary that we do attend various things. But I believe that if a councilman would like to take advantage of that should be brought to the council for a decision on the budgetary expenditure for that prior to the reservation being made.
And she's already cut $4,000 out of there. Or excuse me, 40%. 44%.
And $3,000 out of that miscellaneous line item, and we've have the cell phone line item. So your operating budget has already gone down about 47% there from where you budgeted for 12-13.
Yeah.
Like $1,500. So.
Yeah, really
Did
what
you
I
mean
did.
$1,500 or $15,000?
$1,500, sir, for the schools and meetings.
Great.
But what I did was there was actually 2 budgets. The first budget was pretty much the same as what we had this coming year, and then with the reduction, then I just took the reduction and came up with the new itemized budget that you see here.
Tammy, would you give me a copy of that?
Sure.
That page right there.
This page?
No, that one right there.
The schools and meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't see cutting it down to $1,500. I'll cut it half with you. Go back to $2,500. If you want to make a compromise with me.
That's fine.
All right, that works.
I'm with Tracy.
25 or 15?
25.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm with you.
So where did we end up?
25.
2,500 is consensus?
Yes.
Any objections to 25? Okay.
And do we want to keep the the sales and telephone at 500 and the miscellaneous at 3,000.
Yeah. City clerk. Victim.
Aren't I the lucky one? My budget, since I have such a small budget, when I was asked to do the reduction, it was to lay off a staff member, and that was the only way that I could come up with the reduction. And that's what is reflected here.
Can you just explain the election expense? I'm
Yeah,
sure
I had that highlighted
Well,
also.
the election expense, and that is another reason that my budget is higher this year. Every year it goes up and down. If we have a county election, then we piggyback on the county's ballot, and we are only charged 50 cents per voter. So now this year, the county does not have any items on the ballot, so we take up the total cost, and that cost is $2.50 per voter.
Wow.
So every year you'll see it going up and down by 10,000.
Depending on whether there's a companion election. Or
Right. Yeah, sometimes the county will have an referendum item that we can piggyback on them, but usually it's just the every other year.
I would like to propose, and I ask first for some background on if this occurs in other cities, that we combine the departments of the city clerk and the city manager. I know that Mr. Winger had brought this up before, and I was very intrigued by that proposition. However, I would like to know throughout the state if this is done. You have plenty of experience in other municipalities as you do. So I would appreciate the three of you sharing with us on if that occurs and what are the ramifications of it.
And one further comment. I believe there's, in your department, 50 weeks, give or take, of vacation that has to be taken. 50 weeks. So that's one.
Sorry, 50 weeks of vacation?
Yeah, between the four people.
Oh, I see.
I believe that's correct.
That's true.
And
Right around there. I could be off one or two. And the other salient point, and I'm right with Tracy on this one, too, is, okay, there's only three people, and one of them has to go up and spell Jim's assistant, who has comparable vacation, and one of them is on vacation. You could end up with one person in the city clerk's office at this point in time. As a result, you have three, one goes upstairs, one's on vacation, you only have one person left. I don't think it's workable. And I think the more workable solution is the one you propose.
so if you would three mind sharing, I'd appreciate that.
But just as a comment from me, and have no objection other than you have two charter officers. In most cities that I have worked in, when you have charter officials, you have the separation of those departments physically as well as to the operations. But I can't see a real downside that if we.
And is that true? I forget for the moment the size of the municipalities that you have been involved with. Is this in other similar sized municipalities where the space constraints were less than we have in our voluminous city hall here? Would that be the case, though? Would you not maybe have the city clerk's office next door to the city manager and secretarial services for both?
Typically speaking, being an example, the city clerk there is a charter officer. We were totally separated, and it was sort of a check and balance type of thing as to when you did the minutes for the meetings, it was done by some other office other than the city manager, who was sort of the presenter at those council meetings. It also was a check and balance as to reporting of concerns by residents and that kind of stuff that, for example, what you do here. You have a lot of the public information that goes out, and that was a city comparable in size to us. A larger city that was very distinguished difference. The charter officers there were almost separated by floors, as a matter of fact. So it just all depends. But there's nothing that says you can't do it. It's just that I have not worked in the environment where charter officers have been all grouped into one space.
I would like to hear from the city, as well as perhaps the city attorney when he returns, on if there's any requirements that they do be separated and not share support staff.
No, not that I'm aware of. I haven't given much thought to this. This is just something that you just brought up this morning, so I need to kind of go back and work with Jim and come up with some things. But as I have seen other cities that the charter officers are pretty much in the same office because of the city halls being so small.
Right. Wayne, hi. I had a question for you. We are discussing at this moment a proposal which would be to combine the city clerk and the city manager's office with one set of support staff rather than being, bifurcated throughout the building here. And my question was, is there any discussion about that in the state laws that they need to, because they are charter officers, be separate with separate staffing so that there is, I'm not going there with sunshine, but if there's any concern at the state level for that.
Not that I know of, but we can look at it. I did look at it having to do with the city attorney's office, and we do have some issues having to do with the rules of professional conduct that would come into play. But as far as non-legal type offices, we could certainly look, but I don't think you're going to find any restriction on that.
Okay.
And Ms. Falk, as I recall, 6-7 years ago with Mr. Gabbard was city manager, and y'all were all located, with council and in the same area. So I know we have done this in the past.
Well, I've worked. My experience has been in, as Tammy pointed out, in city hall buildings that were so small that there wasn't really any way for everyone to be separate from everyone. And certainly when people were on vacation or sick, other people would take up the slack on the phones. Again, in my experience, one of the things that's with this city clerk's office is I've never seen such a tremendous amount of support to such a variety of commissions and boards, and that's a huge part of what you do. And in places where I've worked, if you were the liaison to a citizens committee, you were sort of on your own to do your own minutes, agendas, et cetera, which is really a disaster, trust me. So it's been great to work with professionals doing that. The only thing I want clarity on is certainly if we do that to achieve efficiency so that when someone's covering for Tammy, et cetera, they're all together in the same place. It wouldn't actually impact this budget in any way because, again, even in really small cities where I've worked, we have some requirements to have different cost centers from a budget standpoint, just from a general ledger standpoint. So I think what you're after here is more with less, but not anything that would actually impact the dollars in this budget. Well,
yes, I am, because I wonder whether we need the number of we have part-time salaries, and we have the city manager has his own dedicated support staff, whether that necessity is there if we combine the departments. Do we need operating salaries to be almost $200,000 for the two individuals in the city manager's department? Is that a necessity if we combine staff? Could there be some savings that could be translated when we cross-train and we have everybody together?
And if we accept the city clerk's budget and we accept the rationale that she gave, which the only way she could get a savings was a person, then in effect, if we move them all together, we have one less person. That's my only point.
Right.
That's your point.
Yes, that is my point.
So, in other words, the budget would remain as is, but there would just be a physical relocation that made it easier to handle once there was one fewer person in the clerk's
exactly,
office.
And then we don't have to worry about bifurcating your staff going up and down stairs, and there's some efficiency in business. I mean,
so in other words, they could achieve their mission with this budget by being closer to each other,
right,
but not that it would change the numbers that are here.
And in terms of physical moving, I mean, we could easily have the mayor move into the vice mayor's office, the city manager move into the mayor's office, and we have a councilman who finds a desk somewhere. Because they're only part-time employees. Then
put me upstairs. That would be a good place for me.
Because you have your own health insurance, so if you...
Right. I can accept going upstairs.
The answer to the question is we'll proceed under that direction then, that the city clerk and city manager's offices.
Do we have consensus on that? Does anyone object? I do not object.
And then I would suggest that the two of you then work together in terms of if, based on this new paradigm of working together, that possible additional reductions could take place. Is it necessary to have all of the support staff? What can their roles be moved around and shared? And if, depending on if an employee is let go or which employees let go, what will provide the best cost savings to the city?
Or even
and that'll
more
be
fundamental,
charged.
copying machines, the kinds of equipment that you can combine now, or we don't need to duplicate those as well.
And if that can be brought forward when we look at the budget going forward.
This is one, and I won't point them out every single time. I'll just throw one or two in so that we're aware of it. This budget also, though, this reduction in the pension contribution of almost $16,000 will go back the other way when we take away the assumption of the sale of the electric utility at mid-year, and that'll be the case across all these budgets.
Okay, one very small point. The city manager has $150 for postage. He spent $25. They're going together anyway. We don't need the $150. In other words, you're going to pay his postage. What's the difference?
Well, you transfer those into Ms. Bach's numbers, so her numbers would increase.
Well,
You're
I'm not
saving
combining these two
yeah.
these two cost centers. I mean,
Yeah,
when we do
those
postage on
separate.
the meter, we actually separately meter for each department, and
Yeah.
we're going to have some complications with postage later on that we're going to talk about anyway. So
Why would we not
reduce
combine
it,
these
but
two? I thought that was my point.
From an accounting standpoint, they won't be combined because we follow the Uniform Code of Accounts promulgated by the Florida Department of Financial Services, and we have to
And you have to
Have to show them
cost
separate.
centers, which makes no difference. It wouldn't save a dime to put these two things together. It's
No,
just
but
line
Cindy,
items.
you have $150, but Jim has spent $25.
Well, certainly Jim can, and absolutely, if he wants to reduce that, we can. By $100, you got it.
Are
we,
you happy?
First of all, are we through with the city clerks?
Get them all.
Are we through with city clerk?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Tammy. Going to the city manager then.
I'm making the assumption that we're moving ahead as the attachment B. Is that
Yes.
what I'm saying?
So that the only thing that would change in his budget, based on that change, is the $10,437 in the savings and pension contribution.
Okay.
Well, if you look at his expenses, printing and binding are $190. The budget's $500. Schools and buildings, that's okay. It's exactly right. Office supplies are $550 or $236 year to date. They're $550. You could take $100 or $150 off all those too. Telephone is right the way it is.
And again, on some of those smaller expense line items too, we. I always point this out to people that we adopt a budget in July that has to last us through September of next year. So certainly one of the things we've done with budgetary controls in the last year that's worked is that if a department, for instance, suddenly finds that they have to buy something they didn't plan on, like a new telephone, they have a little breathing room to make what we call budget line item transfers, where they can reduce one line item, increase another to cover that unexpected cost, as long as they don't change their bottom line. So sometimes there is just a kind of a round number in here, 200, 500 instead of 63 or 47 or whatever.
I think we're nickel-diming these guys to death here. Just leave it the way it is and
I
let's
just
move
have
on.
one question. Is the city manager's salary, is that part of the contract that we signed with him?
Yes.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, so that,
It has been reduced by 4.62% since you signed the contract.
I understand that, but you're managing less people. You're going to be managing significantly less services in the future, I guess.
But I'm also taking on a department head director's position as utility director. You no longer have one of those in position. And so, therefore, that is a function that's been taken on by the city manager's office. And when John Lee left, he took over even more of that operation.
Okay.
So there may be organizational wide, and the goal is to reduce the organization down, but the responsibilities of carrying out those functions, and possibly, and I think in the contract we have a provision in there that after 3 years in service that we can renegotiate that compensation issue.
All right, so next budget we will visit that.
Yeah, around next budget.
Okay.
When the sale goes through. Anything else for city manager? City Hall?
I would like to have have the discussion that since we have decided to combine the city manager and the city clerk's office, if your employee needs would stay the same in terms of secretarial?
Yes, ma'am. If you're going to reduce one person out of the city clerk's office, when we move down there, we would still need that administrative assistant and services that we would need. Because there's still a lot of things that are taking place. For example, the electric negotiations are not going to cease, and a lot of the background information I get is through that person, and she sort of handled a lot of the contact information. So I'll still need
is that
support.
Something that would not be able to be taken over by the city clerk staff?
Not if they're reducing one person. We couldn't put that much more workload on the city clerk, and because that you're reducing two people at that point.
Okay. So you'll have the discussion between yourself. I want to make sure that the discussion takes place between both of you in terms of who the employee is that is let go, whether that, I don't want to say that it specifically must be somebody from the city clerk's office. I would like you to decide between the two of you together who that person is and where the greatest savings would be.
No question. The value added to the organization is what we'll be doing.
Thank you.
I think the tribal knowledge that Vonda has is
unbelievable.
Unbelievable that you'll never be able to replace. You just can't get rid of her.
Yeah.
Anything under City Hall?
The biggest change here is just about a $15,000 decrease in building maintenance. The expenditures have sort of been up and down. Monty may be able to speak to this. I was driving past this building the other day, and I guess we've been thinking about painting it, but we may still have enough money in there to do it. And then also, the other thing that changes here is this assumption of the decrease in utilities costs was predicated on the sale at 6 months, so that'll go back up.
What happened with janitorial services this year?
The new contract, and actually not just the new contract, but kind of a reassessment of where it gets charged to. So overall, it is cheaper than what we had before, but it's allocated differently than it was before. So.
But we did have to go back to the third low bidder because of issues.
Right.
Exactly.
Any changes for City Hall? Going to the city.
Before you pass on, just for the fun of it, the janitorial services. May year to date, in other words, 2/3 of the year, are $84.17 for what it's worth. I'm just answering Tracy's question. So you've got a budget of $23.07, and you've only spent $84.17 year to date. It's just a number.
Part of the low contract. We were at a low ball contract, and then we went to a higher contract for improved service. So.
I'm just reading numbers.
Some of the other thing to keep in mind is some of those expenditures get paid a month after. We don't account on a accrual basis month by month. We accrue back payments after year end to the prior fiscal year. So sometimes those things at 8 months aren't 8 months worth of payments. So.
As we vacate the city manager's office and attempt to lessen the impact on the structure in terms of the utilization with the combination of offices and what we may look at farther ahead, will that result in any air conditioning decrease? Can we save anything from doing that?
No, ma'am. There'll be very little savings in there. You'll still have to have HVAC in there in order to make sure the mold, but it's also timed into thermostats in other departments, for example, planning, I think are outside provision. So we have a lot of that in the building itself that are intermingled. You'll save some. Obviously, we will not. We can turn it up to 85 degrees or something in order there's air handling. So you'll have some savings, but in the scheme of the whole building, it would be because you're still going to have open doors, open passageways.
Understood. And the reason I ask that question is since there would be very little savings, we need to adequately use the space that is in here. I know Mr. Winger has brought up in the past that there are city employees scattered throughout the community at various locations. And as we go through this budget, if we see locations where we can bring those in-house in order to save going forward, that's something that we'd like to keep in mind.
And we have done that. For example, the purchasing will move into City Hall. At the sale, we'll vacate a building. The important thing is, though, when you start reducing your number of employees in the organization, the people need to be at their work centers. An example of that would be is that Rob Bolton needs to be at the water and wastewater plant.
Of course.
I can't move him in. Rob Slezak, I mean, we could move him into City Hall, but the fact of the matter is at the community centers where he carries on most of his functions and activities, and as people are coming in and out, you've got to have people sitting, and they've been very good at being able to diversify what everybody does there. So if a person's not there, he'll even sit on the front desk if necessary.
Desk.
So we're trying to keep people where the functions are taking place and the interactions, and we got to remember a lot of our interactions are electronic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Moving on to the city attorney.
Okay.
Morning, Wayne.
Of course, our operating costs have they've been pretty pared down over the last few years. I really don't know. It's as the mayor was saying, you could nickel and dime it a little more, but I think it's pretty much set at what it actually costs to operate. So really, like everyone else, the only place you can cut, and this is because of the council's direction and Jim's request. Carol Giroux, who is one of our certified paralegals, decided she would retire early come January 1st, and the only savings would be that if we did not replace her. Now, of course, that does have some serious impacts when you lose 25% of your staff, and keep in mind that we already lost 20% of our former staff when we lost an attorney. So we are now, instead of 3, basically most of the time full-time attorneys and 2 paralegals, we're 2 attorneys and we'd be one paralegal. This creates issues, of course, with staffing the full day. We would probably have to schedule lunches all at the noon hour so that we would at least all 3 be there the rest of the day. And my memo having to do with what services we would cut is geared to what I've been told as far as the risk management fund. My understanding, and Jim or Cindy or Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, the concept is that the city will be going to a zero deductible liability insurance coverage, so that from $1, the insurance company would be providing insurance defense of claims against the city. So that would allow me to transfer basically Catherine McKenzie, which 75% of her work has to do with litigation or litigation support. She would basically be taking over, keeping her current non-litigation duties, and also taking over all of Carol Giroux's non-litigation duties, and Carol has typically helped with those cases where the city has been the plaintiff, and we're trying to collect money or collect on a claim that the city may have. All told, I think across the board, losing the paralegal, obviously Peggy and I will also have to pick up some of the slack. So again, based on the insurance situation, if we're not going to be dealing with insurance defense at all, we'll probably be okay. I do anticipate you may still see some slowdown and turnaround on things. We have kind of a hierarchy of how we address things, and obviously one of the things that would always take top priority would be litigation matters, because they are time sensitive. And on that note, litigation matters are time sensitive, plus they're very time consuming. So when we lost the last attorney, basically what we had to do was farm out the insurance defense. And that's now a cost of the risk management fund. We have outside counsel that's dealing with defending those lawsuits and those claims. That's something that we used to do probably 75-80% of that in-house. But when you don't have the attorney to do it, which was me, you have to farm it out. So you're shifting really that expense to another fund. But with the insurance that I've been advised that would be a function of the insurance premiums that the city would pay. So we should cut down on that outside attorney expense, I would think. Other than that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Where do those funds show that you farm out that capability? Where do those?
That's paid from the risk fund.
Risk management fund?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd just like to say that when we did our benchmarking of city attorneys, the average budget for the city attorneys was $319,000. So with this reduction, we're getting closer to being to the average of our other cities.
Well, keep in mind, I don't want to compare apples to oranges or anything, but it's not just the city council that's our client. Of course, the organization is the number one client, and then we have the city council. We give priority to the city council. We give priority to the charter officers as to the work we do. But every single one of those departments, the department directors, is a client, and we do legal work for all those different departments. Quite honestly, there's days when Peggy and I do nothing but put out fires. We feel like firemen. There may be a day I don't get anything done on a project I may be working on, drafting an ordinance or creating a contract or whatever. It's just and certainly we don't want that to change, but we're there to serve every one of the departments, not just the council. And they do rely on us, I believe, and they do call on us regularly. And we have very full days, trust me.
If what you're saying, if you have less representation on dealing with your litigation, sooner or later we're going to be seeing that in risk management. Where specifically in risk management?
Premiums. What we're doing is redesigning, as we did our health insurance, where we went from self-insured to fully insured. What we're looking at, and what I've been accustomed to in other places, is that you have liability coverage and insurance coverage that pays the first dollar toward legal expenses. You still have a deductible, and the deductible could be $100,000, whatever the number is, but you build into your premium the first dollar for defense goes to the attorneys. Now, what you do is you turn that decision-making over to the insurance company as to if settlements are made. So we would be losing that. But to be very honest with you, when I sit in on some of our meetings where we're discussing exposures that the city has and how are we going to advise the attorney who happens to be representing us in some of these claims, we're making very subjective decision-making process. And so I think turning it over to the insurance company, who also has something to risk, i.e. it's their loss, their money.
Okay.
And it's their expense for if they want to go to trial. That's one of the issues we have when you don't have an attorney in-house to defend cases. Obviously, when we look at a potential settlement, whether it's a good case or a bad case for the plaintiff, if in fact you're going to have to spend $50,000, $60,000 to go to trial, it's more cost-effective often to settle the case at a lesser amount than make the expenditure.
We, in essence, are hiring those attorneys anyway, right. And Wayne is the liaison between the attorney handling the case because they're specialized cases.
Right. Historically, how many cases have we lost to these kind of things?
Lost or settled? Most are settled. Mm-hmm. I have only now, as far as a major claim of like $1.4 million, we won that one at trial with me trying it quite a few years ago now. It was a power line case, but typically we have never had to really go to trial.
Okay.
Because we are able to, and again, when I was handling litigation pretty much in-house, it was a case of you sit across the table. If they have a bad case, you tell them, but here's your minor amount to go away. Or in the situation we have now, but it would change, like Jim said, it's really more up to the insurance company once we get that in place. But currently, the problem is when we have that exposure to a large fee for trying a case, you're more apt to try to settle it, even though it costs you more money. May cost you more than normally.
Okay, so this year, I believe Carol is retiring, and the option is not to replace that position. But during that time, we should be able to see the effect of an in-house attorney taking care of these litigation issues versus the insurance company.
You're still going to have some that are going to be outstanding. I mean, the insurance will be going forward, not
right. It's not
free.
retroactive. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a few cases that are still remaining.
But the cost of settlement may increase, though. Am I correct on that because the insurance company's there?
Well, it gets folded into the premiums.
It's all into the premiums.
Yes, you have less volatility as well. Over the years with the risk management fund, every year each department or each fund paid a premium, if you will, which was based on history into the fund. But if the fund came up to the good or short, that money sort of stayed and came and went. In risk management, you're running your own insurance company. Okay. And in this case, it'll be reflected in the premiums and in whatever deductible we come up with. But hopefully, will be a little more manageable and less volatile from year to year and get allocated to the funds on the basis of real expenses and not sort of a, hey, this is what we think is going to happen.
I just want to know for next year's budget season, I mean, we're kind of making an experiment, and I'd like to be able to see what numbers to look at to see whether it turned out or not.
Yeah, reports from the league, I guess, would be our function.
Stop loss reports with
What you're doing is you're contracting out and you're taking the risk of one way or the other, but every year could be depending on what the claims are as to what your exposure is.
The insurance company will smooth it out. I mean, they
that's
obviously
correct.
are going to take into account other municipalities that they deal with as well.
Absolutely, yes. You're in a pool.
And in my experience, the places I've worked in the league has done this for us. They do a good job of case management and deciding what to pursue and settlement and that sort of thing because they have a lot of expertise in that area. So,
I just want to be real sensitive because I know in the benchmarking we've got some of the lowest cost per hour attorneys.
Yep, we sure do.
Not that Peggy and Wayne aren't worth it, but they do a tremendous job. And
our average with Carol in the mix, $59.15 an hour. Compared to any outside counsel, compared to their rates and their expenses added onto that.
Right.
Obviously, with Carol leaving, she's the lowest paid employee in the office, so our hourly rate will tick up just a little bit for just the three of us.
Wayne, what are you leasing? You have leasing equipment, $2,400.
That would be our copier.
The copier,
I believe.
Okay.
And that includes maintenance, probably.
Maintenance contract falls into that.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else from the city attorney? Any more comments? Thank you, Wayne. Human Resources? Good morning.
Good morning.
I see 1.5 people. That must be you have time.
Well, actually, my salary is divided between risk management and human resources.
Okay. That's where it goes. Okay.
I'm only half.
Probably the one biggest number in this budget, and Lynn and I have talked about it, that may change depending on circumstances, is the professional services line item. Right now that's predicated on the negotiations with the various unions going past the 1 October mark, and us using the services of the outside support with Jason Odom that we have to bring all those contracts to fruition. Certainly, if it goes better than that, that number would go down fairly substantially. But we wanted to be cautious and cover what we thought might be the case.
I think you're right to do so, but for what it's worth, it's $17,042 May year to date. I mean, I'm only saying that as an asterisk.
Thank you, Mr. And Lynn, just got a question for you. Under your major goals and challenges, you've got stated updating the city's personnel rules.
Yes, that's one of the tasks we want to take on next year.
And I commend you for that one. It certainly has been an area that has been sorely neglected and in need of attention. So thank you.
And to answer your question, Mr. Winger, we just started negotiations with the Teamsters, so we haven't had very many of them. Okay. Everything else, we've pretty much reduced every line item except for our professional services. So
I was just going to hit on that. What specifically are those? Those are attorneys that we hire? Jason, specific Jason.
Jason, and if we need arbitrators or if we had to have a special master, those are where those fees would come out of.
So you don't have any cushion. This is a direct.
Correct.
Yeah.
While we're on that area, just kind of a general question. Surely there are many areas that we will be negotiating with the unions that could have significant impacts on this budget. Those being sick pay, vacation pay, holidays, assumptions on pensions, whether we get concessions on health care insurance. What assumptions have we used of those items that are volatile for or subject to union negotiation in our budget?
Well, the sick, we've talked about this before. The vacation pay changes, like the use it or lose it that we implemented a few years back, don't actually affect the budget because we assume everyone makes their full year's salary. So if someone has a salary of $40,000 a year, they're going to make $40,000 a year, whether 3 days of that are vacation or 10 days of that are vacation. They're going to make their yearly salary. The place that really helps us, and you can already see the impact, is in our final audited financial statements where we show our liability for compensated absences. So it doesn't really directly impact the budget until you undertake a year like this one where we contemplate laying off 30 people, then you'll see those numbers hit the budget that year. And certainly as people come and go, it helps smooth that out or bring it down. But in terms of an assumption, you got to assume people are going to get their full annual salary through either a day of working, a day of sick, or a day of vacation. As far as the pension goes, I think we talked about this a little. After we reverse the assumption that we're paying down half of the unfunded pension liability during the year with sale proceeds, and we go back to our full annual contribution, it's by and large payment on the unfunded liability. It's about 4% of salary, 4.5% of salary on salaries themselves, which equates to about $50,000 per 1% in the general fund.
But you're not assuming any increased pension contribution by the employees?
Not at this point.
It's just
because as we talked about, we're right now, it's a couple of things. The pension, and we saw this with the police pension, it actually takes a year for decreases in salary base to affect the pension contribution because it's an actuarial number that's derived in March for the prior October. So this budget would have a pension contribution that's assumed to be the same as it was actuarially calculated in March. Okay, put that aside for a moment. That assumes a 4.5% employer contribution for the normal contribution as a percentage of payroll. Any difference that's negotiated would impact the general fund, which is the one we're all focused on, by about $50,000 per 1%. Again, not instantaneously, but over the course of a year or so. And so I think we left it as, in the scheme of things, that's not huge, and I know that the negotiation sort of revolves around above and beyond that 4.5%, what are the sharing arrangements? And so that's just a number to keep in mind. It's about $50,000 per additional 1%.
And the next big gorilla, the health care insurance. Or have you assumed that we're staying with the 3-tier plan, that we're going to a 2-tier, what the increase of health care, which we know is coming for next year?
We are going to be negotiating going to a 2-tier plan as opposed to a 3-tier plan and introduce that. We also have the cost projections that right now we are projecting about a 17%. That's been a number we've been given, but
a 17% increase?
Increase, yes, ma'am. And so
even with going to a 2-tier?
Well, the 2-tier, it's two things. The 2-tier plan, and also, and this is in the memo, I think, the assumption is that we are going to lower the city's contribution against the health insurance to be the amount we currently contribute on the base plan. So, in other words, if you want the high plan, that's fine, but the city is not going to cost share on the differential.
Right.
That wasn't a huge impact in the dollars, maybe $60,000, $70,000 in the general fund, but I think what it sends us in a direction of cost containment and, I guess, leveling the costs out so that hopefully as we move through this, our future increases start to level off a little bit and be a little more controllable. In other words, we're reducing costs overall on the plan.
Have we done any analysis in terms of, for instance, new employees and employees that have been here only a short time period? if in fact the insurance that we're offering them with what we are paying is comparable to the private sector, to businesses locally?
We really are not. We have not done that to this point, because private sector businesses differentiate between the number of employees. For example, I presume Piper would be considerably different than a small business. We have benchmarked with other cities by going to the Florida League of Cities. Obviously, gives us a lot of information and how we tailor our offerings in the health insurance, and so we have done that.
And what about holidays? I know with the police union we were able to get concessions for removing 2 paid holidays. How is that addressed in this budget for the...
It's not substantially there because the police holiday change, it made an impact. Probably the most overtime that you see in here is in the police department and the general fund when you aggregate it up. And certainly that change has been reflected in this budget. And in the current year, we're actually seeing a fairly substantial savings per holiday. So if we achieve that in the general fund in particular, won't have a big impact on the budget because most of the overtime costs in here are in the police department where we've already made that change. It may help some of the enterprise funds.
Right. Water and sewer.
Yeah,
and electric.
water and sewer, I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Nice job, Lynn. Thanks.
Anything else for Lynn? Thank you, Lynn. Finance. Who's going to do that?
I'd like to talk. I did put an impact statement in the package, so I'd like to go through that for all 4 of my departments briefly. And obviously, I have my department heads here to answer specifics about the individual budgets.
Cindy, can we also go over your organization chart?
Let's take a 10-minute break here. Some people want to.
Thank you.
We'll be back at 11:35.